Lads and ladies, welcome to the Junior Classics.
Hi there, I'm Sir Bradley Hasse, a teller of borrowed tales. Join me as I share stories of courage, adventure, and wonder. But don't take my word for it. You can find out for yourself on today's Junior Classic.
I'm going into the forest. What have you got in that bag of yours? I'm always so thirsty. I can hear the grass growing.
I have such good eyes that I can hit anything.
I should get to the end of the world in less than 5 minutes.
Yes, you can do that. And take all 6 if you like.
Welcome, Junior Scholars. I am Sir Bradley Hasse, guardian of the written word and your guide through the Junior Classics. Our mission is to safeguard the classics and inspire children to a love of good reading and a real and lasting interest in Western literature and history. If this is your first time listening, thank you for joining us, and a very special thank you to my loyal listeners who tune in each and every episode, and especially my Patreon supporters who help keep the show going and growing. If you like what we're doing, creating stories for the good of your kids, consider supporting me on Patreon for $5 a month. You can also write me a letter at P.O. Box 1153, Crown Point, Indiana 46308. And now a shout out to Knox and Teddy, ages 6 and 4 from Euless, Texas. By the way, guys, I lived in Tarrant County for 4 years. I lived in Fort Worth, Benbrook actually, so I know exactly where you guys are. You guys mailed me a letter with some beautiful artwork based on The Half Chick by Andrew Lang, which was back on episode 15 of this season. Knox drew one of the Chicken Brothers, and Teddy painted some magnificent colors. Thank you, boys. Your bookmarks are on the way. And check out the Junior Classics YouTube channel to see me open your letter with my family. If you would like to send me a letter, please send it to P.O. Box 1153, Crown Point, Indiana 46308. Stick around after the story to hear about a special giveaway we're doing when you mail me a letter. Today we start a new series, Tales from the Norselands, and our story is called Ashiepattle and His Goodly Crew. Now, what are the Norselands and where are they? I'm so glad you asked, because our geography spotlight is the Nordic countries, which are a region in Northern Europe, sometimes called the Far North, commonly known as Norden, which literally means the North. They consist of Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden. Have you ever heard of any of those countries? The population of the Nordic countries are mainly Scandinavian or Finnish. The Nordic countries first came into more permanent contact with the rest of Europe during the Viking Age. I'm sure you've heard of Vikings. Vikings were Nordic seafarers, mainly speaking the Old Norse language, who raided and traded from their northern European homelands across wide areas of northern, central, and eastern Europe during the late 8th to 11th centuries. And I think it would be so cool if you guys wrote me a letter and sent in your art projects of Vikings or anything that you find interesting from these Nordic countries. Okay, before we get into today's show,
Lost and found words.
Listen carefully to these words and their meanings and try and spot them during the story. Our first word today is hearth. The hearth is the floor of a fireplace. We might have had this word before. The name of the main character is Ashiepattle, and we're told he was always found sitting in the hearth, raking and digging the ashes. The name Ashiepattle means to play with ashes. And this is interesting. I found out that the name Cinderella is based on the word cinder. We actually talked about this way back when we read Cinderella. And this had to do with the fact that servants were usually dirty with ash at that time because of their cleaning work and because they often lived in cold basements and had to get warm by sitting close to the fireplace. Now, some scholars suggest that Ashiepattle is like a boy version of Cinderella, and the character Ashiepattle is found in many different Norse tales. Our second word today is proclamation. That's with a P, proclamation. A proclamation is an official announcement of great importance. Ashiepattle will hear a proclamation or important announcement from the king issued at church, which is the start of his adventure. Our next word is a trough. A trough is a long, narrow container for animals to eat or drink out of. Ashiepattle's brothers, Peter and Paul, go into the woods and chop down some trees to make wooden troughs. Our next word is a bung. That is B-U-N-G, bung. A bung is a stopper for closing a hole in a container. So think of a big barrel that's got a bunch of cider liquid in it, and it's got a little hole at the top to pour out. Well, you want to put a stopper in there to keep the liquid in, and that stopper would be called the bung. Ashiepattle discovers a man sucking on a bung. Yes, sucking on a bung. The man tells him he gets so thirsty when he can't find something to drink, he sucks on a bung. That's what it is. And our last word is a tramp. A tramp is a beggar or a vagrant, one who travels from place to place on foot. And the king in our story considers Ashiepattle a tramp, and he doesn't think he is good enough to marry his princess daughter. Now, Ashiepattle looks like a tramp because we're told he's all black and sooty and doesn't clean himself up, so there is that. That's all for today's Lost and Found Words. Now on to the show. Woven within Nordic folktales is indeed a common thread of morality and character building. Positive character traits are readily praised and rewarded, and faults are punished, sometimes fiercely, and other times kindly. Peasants gain the respect of gods and a peaceful passage into the afterlife if they work hard and live simply. Worldly possessions are not to be valued, but an honest tongue and a faithful heart are. Gratitude for one's place and lot in life is a strong theme, as well as the old adage, pride goeth before a fall. We've heard that on here before. Nordic folklore brings us some of the most beloved fairy tales the world over. The Emperor's New Clothes, The Fir Tree, The Little Mermaid, and The Little Match Girl, to name a few. Most famous of all Nordic children's storybook authors is Hans Christian Andersen, who we heard many of his tales back in season 1. He brings the land at the top of the world alive in rich descriptions of earth and sea, ice and spring, and of adventures with fairies and queens and courageous young girls and boys. So let us begin with our first tale from the Norselands.
Ashiepattle and His Goodly Crew by P.C. Asbjörnsen.
Once upon a time there was a king, and this king had heard about a ship, which went just as fast by land as by water. And as he wished to have one like it, he promised his daughter and half the kingdom to anyone who could build one for him. And this was given out at every church all over the country. There were many who tried, as you can imagine, for they thought it would be a nice thing to have half the kingdom, and the princess wouldn't be a bad thing into the bargain. But they all fared badly. Now, there were 3 brothers who lived far away on the borders of a forest. The eldest was called Peter, the second Paul, and the youngest Espen Ashiepattle, because he always sat in the hearth, raking and digging in the ashes. It so happened that Ashiepattle was at church on the Sunday when the proclamation about the ship, which the king wanted, was read. When he came home, Amid told his family. Peter, the eldest, asked his mother to get some food ready for him, for now he was going away to try if he could build the ship and win the princess and half the kingdom. When the bag was ready, he set out. On the way, he met an old man who was very crooked and decrepit.
Excuse me, where are you going?
I'm going into the forest to make a trough for my father. He doesn't like to eat at table in our company.
Trough it shall be. What have you got in that bag of yours?
Stones!
Stones it shall be.
Peter then went into the forest and began to cut and chop away at the trees and work away as hard as he could. But in spite of all his cutting and chopping, he could only turn out troughs. Toward dinner time, he wanted something to eat and opened his bag, but there was not a crumb of food in it. As he had nothing to live upon, and as he did not turn out anything but troughs, he became tired of the work, took his axe and bag on his shoulder, and went home to his mother. Paul then wanted to set out to try his luck at building the ship and winning the princess and half the kingdom. He asked his mother for provisions, and when the bag was ready, he threw it over his shoulder and went on his way to the forest. On the road, he met the old man, who was very crooked and decrepit.
Oh yes, where are you going?
Oh, I'm going into the forest to make a trough for our sucking pig.
Pig trough it shall be. What have you got in that bag of yours?
Added the man.
Stones!
Stones it shall be.
Paul then began felling trees and working away as hard as he could. But no matter how he cut and how he worked, he could only turn out pig troughs. He did not give in, however, but worked away till far into the afternoon before he thought of taking any food. Then, all at once, he became hungry and opened his bag, but not a crumb could he find. Paul became so angry, he turned the bag inside out and struck it against the stump of a tree. Then he took his axe, went out of the forest, and set off homeward. As soon as Paul returned, Ashiepattle wanted to set out and asked his mother for a bag of food.
Perhaps I can manage to build the ship and win the princess and half the kingdom.
Well, I never heard the like. Are you likely to win the princess? You, who never do anything but root and dig in the ashes? No, you shan't have any bag with food.
Ashiepattle did not give in, however, but he prayed and begged till he got leave to go. He did not get any food, not he, but he stole a couple of oatmeal cakes and some flat beer and set out. When he had walked a while, he met the same old man who was so crooked and tattered and decrepit.
Where are you going?
Oh, I was going into the forest to try if it were possible to build a ship which can go as fast by land as by water, for the king has given out that anyone who can build such a ship shall have the princess and half the kingdom.
What have you got in that bag of yours?
Not much worth talking about. There ought to be a little food in it.
If you give me a little of it, I'll help you.
With all my heart. But there is nothing but some oatmeal cakes and a drop of flat beer.
It didn't matter what it was, the man said. If he only got some of it, he would be sure to help Ashiepattle. When they came up to an old oak in the wood, the man said to the lad,
Now, you must cut off a chip and then put it back again in exactly the same place. And when you have done that, you can lie down and go to sleep.
Ashiepattle did as he was told, and then lay down to sleep. And in his sleep, he thought he heard somebody cutting and hammering and sawing and carpentering, but he could not wake up till the old man called him. Then the ship stood quite finished by the side of the oak.
Now, you must go on board, and everyone you meet you must take with you.
Espen Ashiepattle thanked him for the ship, said he would do so, and sailed away. When he had sailed some distance, he came to a long, thin tramp who was lying near some rocks eating stones.
What sort of fellow are you that you lie there eating stones?
The tramp said he was so fond of meat he could never get enough. Therefore, he was obliged to eat stones. And then he asked if he might go with him in the ship.
If you want to go with us, you must make haste and get on board.
Yes, that he would, but he must take with him some large stones for food. When they had sailed some distance, they met one who was lying on the side of a sunny hill, sucking at a bung.
Who are you? And what is the good of lying there, sucking that bung?
Oh, when one hasn't got the barrel, one must be satisfied with the bung. I'm always so thirsty. I can never get enough beer or wine.
And then he asked for leave to go with him in the ship.
If you want to go with me, you must make haste and get on board.
Yes, that he would. And so he went on board and took the bung with him to allay his thirst. When they had sailed a while again, they met one who was lying with his ear to the ground, listening.
Who are you, and what is the good of lying there on the ground listening?
I'm listening to the grass, for I have such good ears that I can hear the grass growing.
And then he asked leave to go with him in the ship. Ashiepattle could not say nay to that, so he said,
If you want to go with me, you must make haste and get on board.
yes, the man would, and he also went on board. When they had sailed some distance, they came to one who was standing, taking aim with a gun.
Who are you, and what is the good of standing there, aiming like that?
I have such good eyes that I can hit anything, right to the end of the world.
And then he asked for leave to go with him in the ship.
If you want to go with me, you must make haste and get on board.
Yes, that he would, and he went on board. When they had sailed some distance again, they came to one who was hopping and limping about on one leg, and on the other he had 7-ton weights.
Who are you, and what is the good of hopping and limping about on the one leg with 7-ton weights on the other?
I am so light that if I walked on both my legs, I should get to the end of the world in less than 5 minutes.
And then he asked for leave to go with him in the ship.
If you want to go with us, you must make haste and get on board.
Yes, that he would, and so he joined Ashiepattle and his crew on the ship. When they had sailed on some distance, they met one who was standing, holding his hand to his mouth.
Who are you, and what is the good of standing there, holding your mouth like that?
I have 7 summers and 15 winters in my body, so I think I ought to keep my mouth shut. For if they get out all at the same time, they would finish off the world altogether.
And then he asked for leave to go with him in the ship.
If you want to go with us, you must make haste and get on board.
Yes, that he would, and then he joined the others on the ship. When they had sailed a long time, they came to the king's palace. Ashiepattle went straight into the king and said the ship stood ready in the courtyard outside, and now he wanted the princess as the king had promised. The king did not like this very much, for Ashiepattle did not cut a very fine figure. He was black and sooty, and the king did not care to give his daughter to such a tramp. So he told Ashiepattle that he would have to wait a little.
But you can have her all the same, if by this time tomorrow you can empty my storehouse of 300 barrels of meat,
Said the king.
I suppose I must try, but perhaps you don't mind my taking one of my crew with me?
Yes, you can do that, and take all 6 if you like.
For the king was quite sure that even if Ashiepattle took 600 with him, it would be impossible. So Ashiepattle took with him the one who ate stones and always hungered after meat. When they came the next morning and opened the storehouse, they found he had eaten all the meat, except 6 small legs of mutton, one for each of his companions. Ashiepattle then went to the king and said the storehouse was empty, and he supposed he could now have the princess. The king went into the storehouse, and sure enough, it was quite empty. But Ashiepattle was still black and sooty, and the king thought it was really too bad that such a tramp should have his daughter. So he said he had a cellar full of beer and old wine, 300 barrels of each kind, which he would have him drink first.
I don't mind you having my daughter, if you can drink them up by this time tomorrow.
I suppose I must try, but perhaps you don't mind my taking one of my crew with me.
Yes, you may do that.
For he was quite sure there was too much beer and wine, even for all 7 of them. Ashiepattle took with him the one who was always sucking the bung, and was always thirsty. And the king then shut them down in the cellar. There, the thirsty one drank barrel after barrel, as long as there was any left. But in the last barrel, he left a couple of pints to each of his companions. In the morning, the cellar was opened, and Ashiepattle went at once to the king and said he had finished the beer and wine, and now he supposed he could have the princess as the king had promised.
Well, I must first go down to the cellar and see.
For the king could not believe it. But when he got there, he found nothing but empty barrels. But Ashiepattle was both black and sooty, and the king thought it wouldn't do for him to have such a son-in-law. So he said that if Ashiepattle could get water from the end of the world in 10 minutes for the princess's tea, he could have both her and half the kingdom, for he thought that task would be quite impossible.
I suppose I must try.
Ashiepattle sent for the one of his crew who jumped about on one leg and had 7-ton weights on the other, and told him he must take off the weights and use his legs as quickly as he could, for he must have water from the end of the world for the princess's tea in 10 minutes. So he took off the weights, got a bucket, and set off, and the next moment he was out of sight. But they waited and waited, and still he did not return. At last, it wanted but 3 minutes to the time, and the king became as pleased as if he had won a big wager. Then Ashiepattle called the one who could hear the grass grow and told him to listen and find out what had become of their companion.
Yes. He has fallen asleep at the well. I can hear him snoring, and a troll is scratching his head.
Ashiepattle then called the one who could shoot to the end of the world and told him to send a bullet into the troll. He did so and hit the troll right in the eye. The troll gave such a yell that he woke the man who had come to fetch the water for the tea, and when he returned to the palace, there was still 1 minute left out of the 10. Ashiepattle went straight to the king and said,
Here's the water.
and now he supposed he could have the princess, for surely the king would not make any more fuss about it now. But the king thought that Ashiepattle was just as black and sooty as ever, and did not like to have him for a son-in-law. So he said he had 300 fathoms of wood, with which he was going to dry corn in the bakehouse. And he wouldn't mind Ashiepattle having his daughter if he would first sit in the bakehouse and burn all the wood. He should then have the princess, and that without fail.
I suppose I must try, but perhaps you don't mind my taking one of my crew with me.
Oh no, you can take all 6.
For the king thought it would be warm enough for all of them. Ashiepattle took with him the one who had 15 winters and 7 summers in his body, and in the evening he went across to the bakehouse. But the king had piled up so much wood on the fire that you might have almost melted iron in the room. They could not get out of it, for no sooner were they inside than the king fastened the bolt and put a couple of padlocks on the door besides. Ashiepattle then said to his companion,
You had better let out 6 or 7 winters, so that we may get something like summer weather here.
They were then just able to exist, but during the night, it got cold again, and Ashiepattle told the man to let out a couple of summers, and so they slept far into the next day. But when they heard the king outside, Ashiepattle said,
You must let out a couple more winters, but you must manage it so that the last winter you let out strikes the king right in the face.
He did so, and when the king opened the door, expecting to find Ashiepattle and his companion burned to cinders, he saw them huddling together and shivering with cold till their teeth chattered. The same instant, Ashiepattle's companion, with the 15 winters in his body, let loose the last one right in the king's face, which swelled up into a big chilblain.
Can I have the princess now?
Yes, take her and keep her and the kingdom into the bargain,
said the king, who dared not refuse any longer. And so the wedding took place, and they feasted and made merry and fired off guns and powder. While the people were running about searching for wadding for the guns, they took me instead, gave me some porridge in a bottle and some milk in a basket, and fired me right across here so that I could tell you how it all happened.
The end.
Well, how about that? Our first tale from the Norselands is in the books. How did you like the story? What I liked is how Ashiepattle assembled a team of misfits with unusual superpowers and talents, and then picked the right man for the job to complete the seemingly impossible challenges. Which member of the Goodly crew did you enjoy most? I especially liked how the members of the crew thought about their companions and saved some meat and drinks for them. Good fellas. I'll leave you with this thought to ponder. Which of the two was slower on the uptake? Ashiepattle, for failing to realize that the king would think more highly of him as a son-in-law if he would simply take a bath and washed up a bit before presenting himself. Or the king, for failing to realize that Ashiepattle's crew members are the reason he is able to complete 4 impossible challenges. Which one? Write me a letter and let me know. And I have a special proclamation to announce. The next 8 households I get a letter from will receive in return some awesome coloring activity books that are based on the Nordic countries of Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland. There's a really cool shop in my hometown called Nordic Creations, and she has all kinds of cool stuff from the Nordic countries. I found these cool coloring books. I bought them, and I'm going to give them away to you guys. All right, that's all for this episode. I am Sir Bradley Hasse. Be brave, be loyal, and speak the truth.
Now, for you parents out there, I want you to understand why we are doing this, what we are trying to achieve, and how you can help us. This is a rescue operation to preserve the classics and the wisdom within before it is lost forever. Our goal is to inspire children with a love of good reading by safeguarding and breathing new life into the greatest stories in history, and empower you, the parents, with a resource you can trust to enrich your child's mind and spirit. We don't want these stories and the wisdom within to be forgotten, so our children don't have to learn these lessons on their own. The most important thing you can do for us is to spread the message and tell others about these stories and what we are doing. If you want to donate, we would love that as well. My promise is that 100% of donations will go to building the impact and quality of the Junior Classics. If you have feedback and thoughts on how we can do things better, please send an email
to juniorclassicspodcast@gmail.com.
Thanks for listening to the Junior Classics.
I've always enjoyed the following musical piece, but I never knew it was composed by a Norwegian composer named Edvard Grieg. This is his piano concerto.